Hi, everybody. This is the Batflip podcast. My name is Matt. I'm here with Damien today, and we're going to go over some trade deadline review here. How's it going, Damien?
It's going all right. Yeah, we got the trade deadline was just happened yesterday as we're recording this. It was on Monday. I was traveling, so when I got back, I was super exhausted. So sorry for the delay on this one getting out, but there's quite a bit of action that happened. Even we didn't know how much
Oh,
was
yeah.
gonna really come to fruition, but I mean, as of right here, we're looking at about 25 deals that happened. So we're kind of gonna as we go, kind of hit on the standings. Not really go through a big breakdown like we usually do. And then we're going to skip the players of the week this week just because we really want to make sure that on some of these trades that are bigger deals, we want to really go in depth on the prospects and people that are moved so you can give you guys a better idea of what a kind of a trade deadline entails.
Yeah, and as we go, we'll talk about some of the who we think are the winners and losers of the deadline, and some teams with some interesting strategy for sure. There were some very interesting moves. Fringe contenders making trades. The contenders staying pat. Some teams that were pretty out of it, not selling, and it's an interesting trade deadline for sure. So,
Yes, it was. Well, the first trade, it was kind of a smaller deal that happened. Chicago White Sox got Gerard Dyson from the Pittsburgh Pirates for 243,300 in international bonus money. Um,
Yeah, that's interesting. Gerard Dyson, veteran outfielder. The White Sox needed an outfielder. Eloy Jimenez, not a great defender, and Dyson can step in and be at least a decent defender. Dyson's always a guy who can be a good bench player as well if you need him. He's a good runner, and you can throw him out there as a defensive replacement. Throw him out there in the base paths. And for the Pirates, I mean, you definitely that international bonus money is something that you definitely need to acquire if you're in rebuild mode. I mean, they're a team that you're that's a large way. A lot of teams that have rebuilt the last several years, star players have come out of that international bonus money and signing international free agents. I mean, just look at the White Sox, who they made this trade with, who Luis Robert, international free agent.
right.
Look at some of the other teams. Look at obviously Yohan Moncada wasn't signed by the White Sox, but that's another international free agent who's turned out to
Hmm.
be really good. That's on the White Sox, the team that's trading away this money. So it's definitely a win now move for White Sox. And I mean the Pirates, the worst team in baseball right now, is that's a good thing to get some money back for a veteran, a rental type piece. So
Yeah, it was not a huge deal, but I
yeah,
mean, being a fourth kind of outfielder that can be a defensive replacement or a pinch runner when they need it. Pretty solid deal for both sides. Like you said, Pittsburgh's in the rebuild. That money will help sign somebody.
for sure, for sure.
Um, the next one was pretty much a surprise to me. I did not see this one coming. It was the Oakland Athletics acquiring Tommy La Stella from the Angels for infielder Franklin Barreto. Barreto was a highly touted prospect at one time. He's kind of really failed at the major leagues to really be anything. He's been pretty much a low on base guy in the majors at all. I mean, in his action, he's got 250 on base, a 253 on base, and this year or last year a 138 on base. And he hasn't. He's played in 15 games this year, and he hasn't got on base once.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that, obviously just 10 plate appearances this year, but seven strikeouts in those 10 plate appearances. He's a guy that, I mean, like you say, former top prospect. He's got swing and miss issues. He has this ever since he got into the upper minors. I mean, go back and look at, last year he put up a 121 WRC plus in AAA, which is, a really good number. And, but he struck out 27% of the time, which is really bad. Even though that's a good season in AAA, 295 average, 374 own base percentage, 552 slugging percentage, and that's over 98 games. You've got a guy that he's still striking out a lot, and that could be a little bit inflated, by the AAA baseball that they had last year, and by the his batting average on balls in play being really high. So he's a guy that, I mean, he's never put up numbers in the big leagues. I mean, look back at 2018 in AAA as well. 32% strikeout rate is horrible.
Hmm.
Even though he had a very high, he had a lot of home runs and had a good, good offensive numbers overall. That's just something that you see a lot, that's not going to translate to the major leagues. He's going to have to be better than that at making contact, because he's got raw power. He obviously does. I mean, he's hit a lot of home runs in the minor leagues. He's got the speed. He's a real toolsy player, former top prospect. But I mean, he's going to have to at some point figure out how to hit and at the big league level make contact, or he's never going to tap into those tools.
Right, and maybe a change of scenery is exactly what he needs. I mean, we
For
see it
sure.
before, prospects that kind of flame out in one spot, go somewhere else, and maybe just a different approach organizationally or different numbers that maybe a different organization brings to you, and maybe something they see in their swing. Who
Yep.
knows? Listella was is ticketed for free agency, so it's really only for 1 month. It's
He's a
kind of a
good
win-win.
Yeah, he's a good pickup for the A's though. He's a good player. He'll
Right?
be
Yeah,
solid
yeah.
for them.
Yeah, he's just it's for the 1 month, trading up a guy like Barreto. I mean, we'll see how it ends up, but right now it looks like a win-win deal for both sides. Um,
Oh yeah, I mean, getting anybody with any kind of talent for a 1 month rental is a pretty big deal. So
the next one, like we said on our previous episode, bullpen arms are always something that are going to move a lot. San Diego, who we will talk about plenty in this episode, they probably it felt like they made 25 trades, but
yeah,
it
this was
was
going to
it
be the
was
Padres episode.
yeah, it's gonna be we should just title it San Diego Padres trade deadline. But they got Trevor Rosenthal from the Kansas City Royals for Edward Olivares and a player to be named later. You're going to hear a lot of player to be named laters in this episode. Some people we have found out the names by the time this article was, it hasn't been updated yet. But basically, because of the whole COVID situation, each team has a pool of about 60 players that they are allowed to call up to their big league squad and down at a time. Um, and MLB said this year that you can only trade players in that pool. Well, teams obviously found a loophole in that, and they just decided that each player that they want to trade that is outside that pool, they'll just call them a player to be named later, and then when the season is over, they will basically say that is who gets traded. So they don't have to
Yeah,
be in their pool technically. It's a workaround that obviously teams found. So I wish we had more information on who these guys were because some of them might be bigger prospects.
right.
But we just don't know at this time. So if we do know, we'll hit on it. If not,
You
we'll just
never
have
know who
to
it might be
never
because
know.
I mean, once upon a time, Trey Turner got traded from the Padres to the Nationals, a player to be named later, and that was
Hmm.
all that turned out to be. So
Yep. So I mean, Rosenthal, he was a big reclamation project. I mean, I think he signed a minor league deal in December this last year. He looked awful last year. And then I don't know what it was, but the Royals kind of just found something. I don't know if it was more using his fastball a little bit more, if the velocity finally just came back. I mean, he was coming back from Tommy
and
John surgery.
lots of injuries has derailed his career because he was once upon a time really, really good for the Cardinals.
Yeah. He came in with like a 5.31 ERA. The San Diego bullpen did at least. And Rosenthal finally got his control issues somewhat under wraps, and he's got 21 strikeouts with only 7 walks in 13 and two-thirds innings. Um, he looked really good this year. So Padres with Kirby Yates especially being out, they made a conceded effort to really get some more bullpen arms. And this is a guy who can be. I wouldn't say he's going to be in the back end, but he's obviously a guy who they think is going to be an impact guy for them.
Yeah, for sure. And then getting back from the Padres is Edward Olivares, who is an outfielder. He's kind of an interesting player. He's definitely a little bit of a slower mover. He's about to turn. He's currently 24, about to turn 25, and he's never been above the Double A, except for a small cup of coffee in the big leagues so far this year. With the the differences we have this season. Um, he's a guy that's had pretty good numbers in the minor leagues. He's not a real high rated prospect. I don't think he's too big. I don't think the that scouts are too high on him, but he's a guy that's put up some numbers in the minor leagues. You look at last year in Double A, 127 games. He had an 8% walk rate, an 18% strikeout rate, so he makes a fair amount of contact. The power came through a little bit, 18 home runs. Um, you know, he wasn't a superb power hitter or anything, but he's a guy that looks like he might be able to make it into the big leagues and have a chance. So
Yeah, and getting him for a guy like Rosenthal for the rebuilding Kansas City Royals. I mean, and we won't know the extent until find out who his other player to be named later is. I don't expect it to be a big name prospect, but getting a guy like Olivares who can just maybe be a part of that rebuild is it's a decent haul for a guy like Rosenthal.
yeah,
So the next one was a bigger trade to me just because I love one of these prospects. Have ever since he got drafted. Was the San Diego Padres acquired first baseman Mitch Moreland from the Boston Red Sox for uh, Rosario and Hudson Potts. Moreland has a $3 million club option for next year with a $500,000 buyout. He's hit really, really good this year. Um, and it's a pickup. I mean, we've talked about Cronenworth, Jake Cronenworth a lot on here. It seems like they're just going to move him to second base and allow Moreland and Hosmer to kind of just take over the first base DH role.
yeah.
Um, Moreland's hit really well. We'll see how it translates over to Petco Park, but I mean the way he's looked this year, it's a really big pickup for San Diego.
Yeah, that's a good trade for San Diego. I think you get a guy like Mitch Moreland, and like you say, neither one of those prospects are necessarily bad. I think both of them have a chance at probably they're probably the two best prospects we've discussed so far, best chance to make it in the big leagues. Um, but for the Red Sox, I mean, you're not going to win this year. Obviously, you got one of the worst teams in baseball. Probably not going to
Mm-hmm.
win next year either. You know, Moreland's a guy that's a veteran first baseman, so why do you have him? You can plug in like Michael Chavis there to get playing time this year, a young guy, and then you can pick up a couple of prospects who have a chance. Like you said, you're talking about Hudson Potts being one that you really like, and he's a big guy, huge swing and miss. He's got a really, really good raw power, but he's a big swing and miss guy. If he makes contact, he could end up being a really good player. A big power bat. And then Jessen Rosario is kind of the opposite. He's more of a speed guy. He's going to have to work on making a little bit more contact for my liking. Looking up his numbers a little earlier, still striking out a little bit for too much for a speed. A primarily speed guy, but he's got a lot of tools and he's a fast outfielder, and there's a good chance that he'll be able to hit. So, um, the Red Sox probably out of those two guys, there's a good chance they got one of them being a major leaguer at some point, a legit major leaguer.
Yeah, I have liked Potts ever since he was drafted. Like I said, I mean, he does have a lot of swing and miss, but if he can tone that down just a little bit, he has big time power. I know Fangraphs has him at a 60 power. I think he has a little bit more power than that. But I mean, he does have to tone down that swing and miss to
Oh
really be
yeah,
effective. But it's a really good deal for the Red Sox. Like we said, they're also in that rebuilding phase as well, and trading a 35-year-old Mitch Moreland. I mean, for those two guys, that's a really good deal
yeah,
for both sides.
yeah. I think that was very, very balanced, good trade.
The next one we have is the Atlanta Braves acquired Tommy Malone from the Baltimore Orioles for two players to be named later. I don't expect either one of those to be anybody big name at all. But I'll
Yeah.
go ahead and let you talk about Tommy Malone, Matt, because you're a Braves
Um,
fan.
so here's the thing about Tommy Malone. If this was the biggest problem the Braves had at the deadline was not adding on to this trade, because I don't think this trade in a vacuum is that bad. I mean, the Braves got a guy who can eat some innings. Obviously Tommy Malone. I know he had a horrible outing in his first outing as a Brave on Sunday Night Baseball and on national TV and everything. But I mean, he's a guy who's had a sub 4 ERA this year so far. His peripheral stats look like he's actually been decent. You got a guy that, I mean, you're not really going to give up anything. I mean, the two players to be named later, I think it's unlikely that the Braves would give anything more than maybe a back end of, maybe a middle relief prospect of some kind. You know, it's one of those things where, in a vacuum, this trade's not that bad. It's just that the Braves didn't add anything else but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Right. Yeah, like I said, it won't be much. I mean, Malone, like you said, innings eater. Not a major case, but I mean, Atlanta needed anybody
Yeah.
that could throw the ball anywhere in the vicinity of
He's an
home plate
upgrade
anyway.
over he's an upgrade over Josh Tomlin and Robbie Erlin and
Yeah.
a the rotating wheel of prospects that they've been doing for it seems like for about 2 years now. I mean, whether it's Sean Newcomb or whether it's Kyle Wright or whether it's well, of course Sean Newcomb. It's hard to consider him a prospect anymore because he's not. He's been in the big leagues for like 5 years. He still can't throw strikes, but it's between those guys. It's one of those things that he's gonna hopefully he will be able to add some stability to the rotation at least and throw strikes and maybe if he could give you if Tommy Malone could give the Braves 5 innings of 3-run ball every time he goes out there, it's gonna be absolutely perfect deal for Atlanta to get him. It just for this trade specifically. I mean, when you're not looking at any of the outside stuff, but we'll talk about some of the other stuff later.
Yeah. Next up, we got a really head scratching deal to me. I did not get this one at all. This was Chicago Cubs getting DH, outfield, first base, Jose Martinez from the Tampa Bay Rays for two players to be named later. Martinez was part of a big deal this offseason from the Cardinals to the Rays that gave up top tier pitching prospect Matthew Liberatore, making him go to St. Louis. And in this one, I mean, like we said, we don't know what the two players to be named later are. But after trading a guy like your top pitching prospect for this guy, and they did get another outfielder in that trade, Randy. I'm going to butcher her last name, Randy Arozarena.
Arazarena, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Martinez was supposed to be the headliner in that deal. He signed. I mean, you can keep him through 2022. Um, and to trade him for two players to be named later, which we don't know what those are at the time. But I know the Cubs needed a left-handed hitter, and they got one, a great one in Jose Martinez. But I just don't understand this from the Rays side at all.
I really don't understand. And of course, you're talking about the players to be named later. This might be a pretty high profile minor league lower minors guy. Like this might be a recent draft pick that they're high on or something.
It has to
Um,
be to make any sense at all.
right. For Jose Martinez, you got a guy that I mean he's listed as an outfielder slash first baseman, but he really can't play either one of those
No,
positions. You've got a guy who has really struggled, um, against everybody the last year or so. I mean, he was pretty mediocre last year. He's pretty mediocre this year. He can still hit lefties some. Um, he's under control for a couple more years. I mean, it makes sense for the Cubs and for the Rays. I mean, if you feel like you've got somebody who can step in right now, um, then
it just seems like this seems like a trade where the Rays are selling when they shouldn't really be. I mean, they're top of the division right now. They have a
yeah,
4.5 game lead. This just doesn't feel like a trade that. I mean, like we said, we don't know who the two
yeah,
players to be named later are, but they
right,
should be one of the teams that are kind of pushing a little bit more for it this year. I mean, they were rumored to get Joey Gallo, so I mean, if they were in talks for him at least. So I mean, if that was a
yeah,
trade that would have happened, which it didn't, spoiler alert, then this trade
yeah.
makes absolutely more sense.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I know that they really like the Randy Rosarina and wanted to get him some more at bats. But I mean, every time I question the Rays, they seem to make out pretty well with whatever. I mean, they've got the lowest payroll in baseball, but they're probably right now one of the best teams in baseball. I mean, they're leading the AL East by 5 games or whatever it is. So, I mean, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait and see. That's one of those that, like I say, that's gonna be such a big deal who that prospect is that they're getting
Right.
back, who the players to be named later are, because that can make a big difference in a trade like this, because it might be a low minors guy that's pretty got a pretty good chance, or that scouts love or something.
Yeah, one thing you said there that needs is we could look really stupid with how we're
Yeah,
breaking down these trades in just a couple of years, because these players to be named later or whatever, they could be somebody
yeah.
pretty big and just come back to bite us with our opinions. The next one was a guy who's been rumored to get traded for I don't even know
Oh
how
my
long. I
gosh,
mean,
three,
it seems
2 or 3 years at least, every
yeah,
year.
at least it seems like, oh, yep, this is the year he's getting dealt. Oh, this is the year he's going to get dealt. Oh, he's going to get packaged with this guy, and he never did. But this was finally the year that it happened, and that is Baltimore Orioles, now Colorado Rocky relief pitcher Michael Givens. So Colorado got Michael Givens, and Baltimore got infielder Terran Vivara, um,
Yeah, something like
infield outfielder Tyler Nevin, and a player to be named later or cash considerations. Um, Givens is a guy who he's been really touted as being um, a I'm really blanking now.
he's a lethal right-handed
Yeah,
specialist. He's
that's what
a
I'm trying. Yeah,
he has been the closer for the Orioles, and
yeah.
uh,
His motion is really funky the way he comes from. That's what I was trying to say. He's
yeah,
been a guy who's been noted as being really funky the way the ball comes out of his
had
arm.
a really good slider.
Yeah, when his fastball and slider combo were working, it was deadly because they both came out of the same plane, but then the slider would just completely disappear. Um, this year he's been really good. He has a 138 ERA. It is only in 13 innings. Last year he really struggled, but this is a guy who it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with Colorado, where the slider and curveballs are usually something that break just a little bit less because of the thinner air. But Colorado always needs pitching, and to give
Yeah,
up a guy, they gave up a couple decently real prospects. I mean, Nevin's got 55. They're 55 power. They're talking about in-game power and 55 hit tool. He's not much of a fielder, but he is already 23 as well. Vivara
okay,
is more of kind of just a solid all-around guy. I mean, he can do a little bit of everything, just not anything great.
yeah.
Um,
Varva had really good numbers in the low minors. Now he's a low minors guy at 23. So a guy in high A and in single A at 23 is, you know, you don't really know how to take that. But he's a guy that also had a 13% strikeout rate in high A, and 160 WRC plus. So this guy just absolutely torched the low minors last year. And has really good plate discipline numbers. So that's um that's something that's a pretty big deal for them. And Evan is a guy that his plate discipline numbers have been pretty good for the most part as well. You talk about him having a high amount of raw power. He's not a huge strikeout guy. Now there might be a little bit of a swing change that he needs to make, tap into that raw a little bit more. That would maybe lead to a little bit more swing and miss. But this is a guy that um, you know, last year in Double A, 16% strikeout rate, 12% walk rate, good plate discipline. He had a little bit of he was a little bit low on the balls in play and on his average on balls in play. So maybe that 251 average come up with a little bit better luck. The 400 slugging percentage is a little bit disappointing for a guy with his power, but he's a legit prospect. Both these guys are legit prospects. So
yeah, they're both 23. So I'm not sure how much of an impact they were going to make to Colorado. But going over to Baltimore, how we already talked, they're a young team. They've looked really good. They've played above than what they really should be playing at.
yeah,
Maybe they get a couple guys that can help them out in the future. And Colorado gets a badly needed bullpen arm. I guess kind of signaling they're going for it after they've looked really bad as of late. But
yeah,
pitching is something you always need in Coors Field. So
yeah.
it's a really good pickup. I did not expect them to be the guy that picked up Michael Givens at all.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so the next one we got is the San Diego Padres picking up catcher Jason Castro from the Los Angeles Angels for right-handed pitcher Gerardo Reyes. Gerardo Reyes seems to be a I don't know if he's projected more as
He's a
a
reliever.
bullpen arm, I
He's a
believe. Yeah, right.
reliever all the way. He's got a
Yeah,
super good fastball, good stuff. He's really a two pitch guy. His command's rough. His command has been better though the last couple years in the minor leagues. Looking at 2018, 2019, going from in 2018 in high A, he had a 661 walks per nine, which is awful. But then in 2018 in Double A, after I guess a promotion, he got from after that he got a lot better, and you know this is a guy that's going to miss bats. He's going to strike people out, but the commands really gets what's going to be the issue for. But he's the ceiling of a back end of the bullpen, a closer type
yeah, and
role.
he's already 27.
And he's been in
Um,
the big leagues. He pitched in 26 innings last year for the Padres, and lots of strikeouts. The walk rate wasn't terrible. He got hit around a little bit, but in 26 with a 7.62 ERA in 26 innings, but his peripheral stats showed a little bit better than that, with a 3.41 FIP, which that usually is a pretty good indicator that his ERA might have been being so high might have been a little bit fluky. So we'll see. This is an interesting guy, to get for a role player catcher. So
yeah, I didn't think Jason Castro was going to be that much of a an upgrade from what they had in Austin Hedges, but it made me shake my head. But we'll hit on that on why this
yeah,
actually becomes a bigger deal in hindsight, and just actually pretty much the next trade that we're going to talk
yeah,
about. Which this one was probably the second biggest trade. And the
yeah,
Padres also made this one as well. And spoiler alert, they actually made the biggest trade of the deadline
yeah.
as well. But this one was for utility man. I think he's played
He's
more
a catcher.
catcher than
Yeah,
anything this year, but he can play some second, some third. Austin Nola, he's the big headliner going to the Padres. And two relief pitchers in Dan Altavilla and Austin Adams for infielder, outfielder Ty France. I mean, he's more of an infielder, but he has played a little bit of outfield, I believe. Taylor Trammell, which is the big name going from San Diego to Seattle. Relief pitcher Andres Munoz and catcher Luis Torrenes. Torrenes? I think that's how you say it.
yeah.
Um, Nola is a guy who he's a late bloomer. He is 30, but he's looked this year especially. He's looked phenomenal. But he's a guy that I started actually hearing about last year. I'm not sure if that was his first taste of the majors or not.
I think that was his second year, but it was
Um,
his first good year.
yeah, his first good year, and he hit really well. Um, in 2019 he batted 269, but he had a 342 on base. He's had 10 home runs. That's when you kind of start getting your name for yourself. And then this year he's hit 307, a 377 on base. A 525 slugging percentage. Yeah, he's somebody that I mean, people are saying that this they might have won this deal, and if you
Uh,
look back, like we said just a couple years ago, that we would not have. These things can change really fast.
yeah, so I think the Padres. I actually think the Padres did win this deal. Austin Nola is guy that can catch, but he's a good hitter, and that's something that is rare to see these days. I mean, they're going from the opposite, a guy that in Austin Hedges who couldn't hit for worth a lick, but he could, he was a good catcher. You flip the page, and now you've got a guy like Austin Nola who can really hit for somebody who can who can play catcher. Um, and I really like that trade. I thought it was a great trade for them. Austin Nola's a young guy; he's under control for a while. And then you get a couple of pretty good bullpen arms as well in that deal. Um, you're giving up. Ty France, who has gotten a lot of publicity, but I really don't think he's going to be a great major league player. He's definitely going to be a major league player. He already is. But I think he's more of going to be in a role player, bench bat type situation. He's not a good defender at all. He's got good raw power. Um, but he's got swing and miss. He doesn't have great plate discipline. He's a free swinger. So, I mean, I think he could definitely, if he works on his approach some, he could end up being a little bit better. Obviously, the headliner is Taylor Trammell, who was just traded, year before last from the Reds to the Padres.
Hmm.
Um, so the thing about Taylor Trammell is that he has a huge name because of how he did early in his minor league career, but he really was not very good last year once he got to the middle. Uh, Once he got up into Double A with the Reds last year, which was the first half, the plate discipline numbers were pretty good, but the power wasn't there. Power wasn't there at all. I mean, 6 home runs and 381 plate appearances. He had only a 106 WRC plus, which is not great. I mean, it's about average league average. A 336 slugging percentage and a 236 average were really what held him back. And then the Padres, when he got to the Padres, he really didn't fare that much better. I mean, in fact, the plate discipline went away a little bit within his shorter amount of time with the Padres Double A system. He struck out 27% of the time. And Taylor Trammell is a guy that I think he's got a lot of raw power. People are still crazy over how he did in the futures game. A couple years ago.
Right.
And he's fast. He's rangy. He can play the outfield, and he's a good runner. Um, but the big issues I've seen with him from reading up on him a little bit more and focusing on what he's done the last couple of years is it's got to be hard for him to be an elite outfielder with his arm. He doesn't have a very good arm, and he's gonna have to if he doesn't he's gonna have to tap his raw power a little bit more than he has, because right now I mean his hit tool is pretty good, but it's not going to play without him hitting no home runs. I mean, without him hitting for any power. Like, I mean, a 330 slug, a 336 slugging percentage in Double A is not going to cut it. I mean, this is a guy that he's still pretty young. I mean, he's 22, but he's a guy that's still going to have to make some improvements. And you've seen him fall in the prospect rankings the last couple years too. I mean, this is a guy that was pretty sure at one time like a top 20 type prospect. That's now he's a Fangraphs has him at 68 now. So I still think he's very well might have a chance. Um, but who knows? And then Munoz. I don't know if you know too much about Munoz, but
Yeah, he's a
he's a
bullpen arm.
flamethrower.
Great, fastball. The Fangraphs have him rated at an 80 fastball out of 80.
Yeah,
Um, his slider's a 55 right now, projected to get to a 60.
yeah,
I know he is rehabbing Tommy John.
yeah. Tommy John's the
Um,
big thing there. They would not
I
have
think
traded him without it.
I think he just had it this year, which means he's out all of this year and most, if not all, of next year, I believe.
Yeah,
Um, he's a straight bullpen arm, like we said, two pitch pitcher, fastball slider. He, like we said, flamethrower has a lot of upside, but the Padres are going for it now, and that'll be we'll hit on that a little bit more in the next trade. But trading a guy like Munoz, that's actually a big name as well. Some argue that he might be a bigger deal than trading Taylor Trammell because they figured this guy could be a high level elite closer
yeah,
when he does finally come back. But that's definitely
yeah,
he's definitely a big arm. And then Torres is he's not a rookie anymore, so he hasn't. We don't have his grades of what they grade him much anymore. But he never seemed like a guy that they were gonna invest too much in. Between last year and this year, he played in a total of
yeah.
14 games with
And
them so far.
you're talking about bringing in a guy that is also under control for a while too.
Right.
So
Yeah. So Torrenius isn't. He's more of a throw in this deal. He hasn't really proved much at the majors. I mean, his highest on base is a 333, and that was in 7 games this year. Um, but he might profile to be, a backup catcher in the league. I don't think he has any starting value
you never know.
in this league going forward. But
So
the
the,
next deal is
it's the big
this
one.
is the big one. I hate it that the Padres did this deal because that means that they get substantially better in the Dodgers division. But they got Mike Clevenger from the Cleveland Indians and Greg Allen and a player to be named later. Um, you know, for a prospect who's been in the majors this last couple years, Josh Naylor, Cal Quantrill, a pitcher, their catcher Austin Hedges, which is what we kind of referred to. We didn't think that they would do anything with him because he's been a really defensive catcher. But um, also Gabriel Arias, Joey Cantillo, and infielder Owen Miller. Um, really, really big deal. Um, Clevenger for the Padres is massive. It's something that they have been trying for many years. You know, they were in the Chris Archer sweepstakes for a long time, and then they were like, okay, this is the year we're going to go for Noah Syndergaard. It was, and then they were going to be players for not Max Scherzer, for Garrett Cole. You know, every time a big
Yeah,
name pitcher comes up, it always seems, they were in the talks for Trevor Bauer
yeah,
last
they
year.
finally got him.
That's where the actual whole Taylor Trammell came over in the Trevor Bauer deal last
Yeah,
year. But Clevenger, I mean, obviously we've talked about what has gone on, and the Cleveland's come out and said that they didn't trade him for this whole reason. But a guy who's under club control for another 2.5 years, I think he's actually controlled through 2024, actually, or no,
Clevenger.
no,
Clevenger's
Clevenger's
through
through
2022.
2022.
Yeah,
Allen is through 2024.
yeah.
Um,
Allen's
but
thrown into that deal.
Clevenger's an ace. I think he's an ace. Many people have him as a good two.
Yeah.
But I think he's definitely just what the Padres needed to go along with Paddock and Dinelson Lamet at the top of that rotation.
Yeah, so the thing with the Padres on that deal is that I like it for the Padres. I don't hate it for Cleveland. I think for the Padres, I think Cleveland could have gotten a better return when it comes to elite prospects, but they got a lot of prospects in this deal.
Yeah,
They got three really good prospects plus the two big league players that they got. So that's a big deal. Obviously Clevenger's wouldn't have been traded if it wasn't for his issue with his clubhouse issue. But a couple of the big names that came back for the Padres from the Padres were Josh Naylor, who I mean he's a guy that he's got a huge raw power. Um, he he's got he's a hitter. He's a
yeah,
designated hitter. I think he's going to be a designated hitter. I know that I think Cleveland's planning on playing him in the outfield because they just need outfield so bad. But I mean, Josh Naylor he's got 20 grade speed. I mean, the guy he's not going to be a very good defensive outfielder.
yeah.
Um,
They really have two DHs with him and Franmil Reyes.
exactly. I don't
Um,
really understand that part of it. Um, because they did have a DH. If you're going to go get an outfielder, then get somebody who's going to be an outfielder. But I mean, no, Josh Naylor's really good prospect, and he's got a chance to be good. He's had really great plate discipline numbers in the minor leagues to go along with his plus raw power, and I think it's a guy who's going to hit. And then Cal Quantrill, um, he's a former top draft pick from the Padres, and he's a guy that I think, I mean, you talk about him with the Padres and you don't know, but then you talk about him with Cleveland and you feel like he's probably going to be pretty good the way they develop pitching. And for that matter, talking about Mike Clevenger, I think Mike Clevenger is a really good pitcher. And don't get me wrong about the Padres being smart and going to get him, um, especially with the fact that the Padres didn't give up one of their top three prospects, top four prospects. Like they gave up some good prospects, but they didn't give up like one of their elite prospects that they have. The thing about him is though that he is you don't know how much of that is the way that pitchers have come into Cleveland and done so well and then left Cleveland. It's kind of like in Houston. Pitchers gone in through Houston and done really well there and then left and they've been good, but not quite as good maybe. You hope that Clevenger is able to keep it up. It's a little bit risky, especially with a guy that's had those clubhouse issues in Cleveland. And he's a guy that hadn't been great this year. I know he's spent that time in the minor, at the AAA camp because of the whole clubhouse issue with going out, leaving the team hotel and everything. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see. This is a guy that has ace potential though, and you would if you expect him to do what he did in Cleveland, then he's perfect for the Padres because they didn't need a starting pitcher, but they very well could have used it. So
yeah. Um, and just kind of hitting on the rest of the prospects. Arias he's one of those guys. He doesn't have a lot of hit to his game, but he's got He's scouted to be an average power hitter and speed, fielding, throwing, kind of
Yeah.
everything else, but his contact is kind of what is the problem there is. Cantillo, he seems to be more of a bullpen arm than projected at least. He doesn't have a great fastball, doesn't have a great curveball. His changeup is really his big pitch. He's more of a command guy. Um, if he could just go fastball and changeup, he might be a decent arm out of the bullpen.
Yeah.
He would really have to develop. If he wanted any hopes of being a starter, really develop that curveball a little bit more, or
Yeah.
maybe even a slider. Owen Miller is a guy who is pretty solid at everything. Graded anywhere in between 40 to 55 on everything he does. Doesn't have a lot of in-game power, but his speed is decent, fielding's decent. Just he's pretty much a throw-in that's just kind of decent at everything. I mean, he's 23, he's at Double A. Um, maybe they're just shooting for fish in a barrel right now with that one. They this trade seemed to be more of a quantity prospect over
Yeah.
quality.
For sure.
Um, it depends on really how Naylor and if they can turn around Quantrill, because Quantrill was supposed to be a big prospect, and he's really kind of struggled
He's
since
been
coming
he's been
up.
okay. He
He
hasn't
hasn't been
taken the
what they
whole league by
expected.
storm, but
He hasn't been
yeah,
the high ranked prospect that
yeah,
everybody thought he was.
yeah,
Um, so that's the biggest trade that happened. Uh, I don't think. I mean, we kind of saw rumblings of Clevenger being traded, but I mean, for it to actually happen and the Padres to be the one that
yeah,
finally are able to pull the trigger, that was it was quite shocking.
yeah,
Um, so kind of a couple other ones. Oakland kind of gets Mike Minor. He was really good last year, struggled this year. We don't really know the return. A couple
yeah.
players to be
Player to
named
be
later.
um
Um,
the
it
big.
could be a it could
I
be
was
a
gonna
good deal
say
for Oakland.
y-
Um,
yeah. It depends on how he does once he gets into if he's able to do it. He's still his stuff still the same as it was last year. I was gonna say for the Rangers though, they should have traded him last year easily. That was
and
really dumb of them not to, and they're not going to get anything near back for him what they could have gotten last year.
and for the Rangers, because talking about this deal about it, this is a perfect example of why you trade people at their height of their at the height of their value. They
Yeah,
did not trade Lance Lynn, who we made a lot of conversation on
yeah,
and deals on. They there was discussions about the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Braves, and they ended up not trading him. He signed through next year,
yeah,
but you were never going to have a higher value than he had right now. And for them to not make that
yeah,
deal is really, really disappointing
yeah. I
with
mean,
whatever it was.
I don't really understand it either. Looking at some of these other trades pretty fairly briefly, the Blue Jays got Robbie Ray, who's another guy who's been talked about being traded for a long time.
Yeah,
Um, Robbie Ray has not been very good this year. He's still the same guy. I mean, he walks the whole stadium. I mean, his fastball's still good. He's got good breaking stuff. He's gets swings and misses. He just can't. It's infuriating how poorly he can throw strikes. The stuff's still really good. Um,
yeah.
and
They didn't give up much. I mean, they gave up a
yeah,
guy he's a bullpen arm,
yeah,
fastball, curveball, decently okay command, about average, but didn't give up much. Like you said, Ray struggled to really find the strike zone. So, I mean, if Toronto can find something in him, then they got a decent pickup. But he's only supposed to be for the rest of this season. Then he's a free
right,
agent, so
yeah. So
not that big of a deal. I would say another one of the bigger deals, which we kind of talked about a little bit beforehand, was the Miami Marlins getting Starling Marte for left-handed pitcher Caleb Smith, right-handed pitcher Humberto Mejia, and Julio Frias. Marte has been really good this year. I believe he's batting over 300. He's playing a really good center field still. Um, I didn't understand why Caleb Smith was in the deal. He's a guy who, when he's on, he is really, really good. I mean, double-digit strikeouts per game when he's on, but he can also really get hit quite a bit when he's off. I don't know much about Mejia and Frias. Maybe you do a little bit more.
yeah, I mean, you talk about Mejia is a guy who he actually got a taste of the big leagues this year, but he's really a low minors guy still. He got the chance the uh, because of the issue with the COVID issues the Marlins had. Um, but he's been pretty good there. Frias is kind of the same way. He's a low minors guy right now. I mean, he has not gotten that chance in the big leagues yet, but he's a low minors guy. Uh, Smith has issues. I mean, he gives up a lot of home runs. I mean, he hasn't been great. The big issue I have with this deal is, and I think the Marlins got a really good deal for Starling Marte. I think Starling Marte is a good player. He's under control next year. The big issue I have is that why are the Marlins making win now moves? I know that they're currently technically a postseason team, but they don't have a chance at winning the World Series. And why are you making a win now move? And even if Caleb Smith doesn't end up being that great, it's not like if you're going to trade him, trading him's not the problem for me. Trading him for a guy who's going to be not going to be a part of your contending team in a couple years is not very wise in my opinion. But I mean, who knows? I'm assuming the Marlins were really expecting Caleb Smith to not pan out, and giving up a couple other low minors guys is interesting for sure. I don't really understand that too much, but
Yeah, they shouldn't be a contending team this year, but they're making a move to go for it. I mean,
yeah,
at least you got to give them a little bit of props that they're going for it, like the Pittsburgh
yeah,
Pirates never did.
yeah. Um, yeah,
So we got a kind of a 3-1, just because they're very minor deals. But the Cubs
yeah,
got Andrew Chafin, Josh Osich, and Cameron Maben. They were all their own separate deals.
yeah.
Nothing was major traded for them. Kind of just want to group all those together.
Yeah,
Um,
it's players to be named later or cash, and I mean, I don't. I thought the Cubs had a poor deadline. Chafin could be good if he plays, but he's injured right now. He's still in the
yep.
DL or the IL. And then Cameron Maben's a bench outfielder who really isn't that good, and I mean, he can play, but he's a big leaguer, but he's not really that good. And then you've got a guy that Osich is a pretty average lefty, so I don't really understand that too much. Um, Another big deal that we talked about was the Jonathan VR deal,
Yeah.
which is I thought was really interesting as to why the Marlins are buying Omarte and then trading their best player so far this year. Um,
Right.
to, so I love that the return the Marlins got. That this is a deal they definitely should have made for
Yeah.
Griffin Conine, who has been very very good in the minors so far. Um, he could end up being a really good player for Miami. Not to mention that the fact that his dad was such a big player for Miami back in the late '90s when they won the World Series. So um,
Yeah, the problem with Conine, I mean, he has a lot of swing and miss in his game
he
as well.
does.
He is 23 and he's only at single A ball. Obviously, he didn't really play this year because the whole minor leagues being canceled. But as of last year, when he played 80 games, he had a 30, almost 36%
Yeah,
strikeout rate. Um, still a 371 on base. So I mean, he's still getting on base even though he's striking out, which
yeah.
that's
The
a
walk.
very good indication. 11% walk rate is good.
Yeah,
But like we said, I mean, 22 home runs in 80 games. It's 348 plate appearances. That's still massive, massive power. Um,
yeah,
if it's a deal that the Marlins could bring him up and see what he's got. I mean, Lewis Brinson really hasn't panned out much, and the rest of their outfielders aren't really showing much else. I mean, Harold Ramirez and what's the other one they have? I'm blanking on his name. Monte Harrison.
yeah,
They haven't really shown much
yeah.
of
Of
being
course,
anything
Monte Harrison has been good in the minor leagues. He's just barely gotten a chance at the big league level so
right.
far. So
Um, Conine's a really big. I mean, it was really interesting for them to get him. Um,
yeah,
couple of the other ones, Goodwin being traded, Brian Goodwin from the Angels. I mean, he's a
yeah,
really good player. I think very underrated. I think we both feel that. Packy Noddington, which I think is probably the best name that was traded, and a cash or a player to be named later. Um, I mean, Reds just getting another outfielder. Angels kind of getting another arm that they can use. I mean, they always need pitching, especially the Angels.
yeah,
The Diamondbacks trading Archie Bradley to the Reds for Josh Van Meter, who's a utility guy, and Stuart Fairchild. Don't really think either of them are going to be, much. Neither of their names really jump off the page when you look at them.
Yeah.
I think Fairchild was like Cincinnati's 11th prospect, but they don't have one of the better prospect groups in baseball, anyways.
Yeah.
So wasn't much there. The Mets getting Miguel Castro from the Orioles. I mean, they traded a left-handed pitcher and a player to be named later, or cash as well. I mean, Castro's been decent this year, but I mean, he's been a guy who's been traded multiple times over. I mean, I think the first time I heard about him was the Troy Tulowitzki trade when he got traded from Toronto to
Yeah.
Colorado. But he's just never been a guy that panned out. Baltimore, he's been decent, but
You're not giving up very much
not giving up
in the
much.
Mets. So
Yeah. Um, the Padres getting another bullpen arm in Taylor Williams. I mean, I guess he could be a starter as well, but I think they're going to be thinking more of him as a bullpen arm. He's controlled through 2023. They got a player to be named later, so we don't
yeah.
know what that one is.
Um,
The
Kevin
Mets
Pillar.
reacquiring Todd Frazier and Robinson Chirinos. They give up two players to be named later. I mean, Chirinos is probably going to be their backup to Wilson Ramos. I mean, he was only 5 for 42 at the plate this year. Frazier's a guy New York knows well. I'm guessing this means that J.D. Davis is injured a little bit more than people think he is for
Yeah, I
them to
don't.
get Frazier again.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, J.D. Davis can also play the outfield, so I don't
Yeah,
really understand the move too much.
right.
The cut. Obviously, we talked about the Cubs getting Maben. We talked about the Kevin Pillar going to the
The
Rockies.
Rockies,
It's
yeah.
interesting. I
David
don't.
Phelps going to Philly from the
Um,
Brewers.
that's an interesting trade. I mean, the Phillies didn't really do too much to add to their bullpen at the deadline. They added a bunch of guys, but they didn't really add any top arms until Phelps, who has been good this year. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with him. Um, and then the the last big deal was I know you'll have opinions on this one, but Ross Stripling to
Yeah.
the Blue Jays. I really didn't understand that deal very much. I know Ross Stripling's not under control much longer. I guess a couple years, but I really don't understand why the Dodgers would trade him. I mean, um, it's confusing. If the players to be named later need to be pretty good because Ross Stripling's a pretty good pitcher. I know he
Um,
hadn't been great this year, but
well, we do know it did come out today, one of them at least, and that was right-handed pitcher Kendall Williams, 20-year-old, 6'6". He projects to be right now a bullpen arm. Some think that he could be a starter. Um, Decent fastball, decent curveball, decent changeup, command. I think I want to say he was the 11th ranked prospect for the Blue Jays. He was a second rounder in 2019, a second round draft pick in 2019 from the Blue Jays. So he only pitched 16 innings last year. He started the 5 games. He had
yeah,
a almost 11% walk rate, walks per nine, I should say, or Ks per nine. My bad. Strikeout rate per nine, almost 4 walks per nine. So his command needs to get a little bit better. But he only allowed a 167 balls in play, and he had a
yeah, it's
263 FIP, 113 ERA, and a 332 xFIP. In those 16 innings, he struck out 19 people. So
yeah.
he,
You would expect his ERA to come up a little bit, but he was still pretty good.
yeah, and his command is something that can get a little bit better. Dodgers have always been somebody that can make pitching. Um, they always develop pitching really well. So he is the one guy that I saw today that came through. We don't know who the other one is yet. The only reason that I understand with Stripling, from what everything that I've read about it, is that they want to get Tony Gonsolin into the rotation full time, and they have Stripling has said vocally that he does not want to go back to the bullpen. So they pretty much it was coming at a time where they also needed to activate Alex Wood off the IL. So they have too much respect for Ross Stripling and everything that he's gave them. So they decided just to do a deal that it works for them as well. and give him the opportunity to go somewhere else and start and not just be demoted to the bullpen again. And then that allows Tony Gonsolin to get pushed into the rotation full time.
Yeah, and that's something that makes me wonder why. Because I mean, Tony. No offense to Tony Gonsolin, but you've got a proven big league pitcher in Ross Stripling who's been good for his last 3 years, and you're going to bring in a guy who's. I mean, Tony Gonsolin's a pretty good prospect, but he's not like a top prospect. I don't
He's been
understand.
really good, and Stripling's really struggled this year.
I know
Gonsolin's
he struggled
splitter,
this year, but
um, the fastball splitter curveball that Gonsolin has had, he's been really good this year from watching him. He doesn't walk people a lot. You know, he's not that much of a high ground ball guy, but it's one of those scenarios where Stripling, he's a good starter. He's really struggled this year. He's a better bullpen arm, to me at least. And I just think that they don't want to put him back in the bullpen where he's better. He wants to be a starter, and they just kind of were like, okay, we have too much respect for you. Sort of the same thing with Kenta Maeda. They
yeah,
really they same thing. He wanted to be a starter, and they thought he was a good starter during the regular season, but when it came postseason, he was an even better reliever, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted to be a starter, and it's their right to do that. Stripling is. I have a lot of feelings towards that guy. He is one of the best human beings or and teammate you'll find, and it was a really big deal for him to want to start. I mean, he was very vocal.
yeah,
Anytime that he was put to the bullpen, that this is what the team needs now, but I am a starter. And he made a when they before the season got canceled to COVID, it had come out that he had kind of lost the fifth starter job to Alex Wood, and that they were going to put him in the bullpen. And he was very vocal about that. He said he didn't feel that he had a fair shot to win it, and they kind of had their mind made up because when they signed Wood, they told Wood that he was going to be a starter. Um, so I think it was just one of those deals. They want to get a guy like Gonsolin in there who more team control and just let him finally get established and not bounce back and forth between maybe a bullpen or maybe starting or maybe
yeah,
down in the minors. And I think once given more of an opportunity, Gonsolin will be very good. I mean, I think he could be a four. I mean, I think he's probably a really really good four. On a championship team, maybe he's a five. I mean, if he's your five, you're doing really well for yourself. Um, and Kendall Williams is a very real prospect. They said that uh, from what Andrew Friedman said that both guys were um, going to be very big guys that they felt impacted quite a bit. That neither of them were major league ready.
yeah. They're
But what
both
it,
low minors guys. They're kind of lottery ticket
Yeah.
types.
So
So
once we figure out who the other one is, Marshall or Williams becomes the 16th ranked prospect right away on the LA thing. So he was, I think, 11 with Toronto. Um, they got a lot. They got a lot of good guys. So I
yeah,
just think this is a deal where they kind of just
uh, uh, yeah,
respect for one guy and wanting to give the other guy an opportunity. I think Stripling's through next year, no,
yeah,
2022.
yeah. He's got a couple
Um,
years of control left. So
he's
um,
really struggled this year. Maybe, hopefully, going to Toronto, teaming up with his old guy Hyunjin Ryu again, will
yeah.
help him turn it around. So
So yeah, that's interesting. So, who we're about to run out of time here, but who are your biggest winners and losers of the deadline? Think?
I think the winner has to be the Padres. They're going for it. I think your biggest loser, which I think it might surprise a lot of people, I think it's the Texas Rangers.
Mhm.
Um, they missed a big opportunity to trade Lance Lynn. Um, he will he's at the best that he's ever pitched.
Yeah,
You got the rest of this year and signed through next year. And for a team, like the Braves that maybe were, they're looking for pitching as well. The Dodgers were rumored. The Yankees are looking for pitching. You could have capitalized and maybe got a little bit more for him than what you should have
yeah.
got even.
So
And go ahead.
So I was just gonna you talked about that, and I agree with you on the Rangers. Here's the reason why: if you're the Rangers, are you what's their plans next year? Are they trying to win
Exactly.
next year? If they're trying to win next year, then I understand it. But at the same time, they're asking the Braves, and I don't know what they asked the other teams, but the package they asked for from the Braves was Drew Waters plus. for a
Hmm.
guy that for a pitcher who's got a year left of control and a year and a month basically. I don't
Yeah.
understand why they thought they could get that out of any team, even if the Braves are desperate for pitching. And I don't understand why they don't move Lance Lynn for a slightly lesser package, regardless of who it's to, because that's I mean that's an outrageous ask for to get a top 25 prospect in Major League Baseball plus more for a guy like that. And the same factor, you talk about them. I mean, it's they they move Mike Minor. They're selling too. They're doing that, but still selling. They sell Mike Minor. They sell Robinson Chirinos. I don't understand why the Rangers thought that it was a good idea to hold on to Lance Lynn but sell these other guys. And then I think if you look at a couple other teams, I think if you look at, I think the Braves obviously a big loser at the deadline, not getting another pitcher than Tommy Malone. Um, we'll see what happens with that rotation going forward, but it's not an encouraging thing to me. I was pretty upset about that yesterday, and you got a couple teams that stood pat that I felt like, like the White Sox. They could have very easily gone out and acquired a pitcher. I mean, I know Ross Stripling. It sounds like the Dodgers got back a couple of realistic prospects from him for him, but they're also low minors lottery tickets. It's just like, are you telling me that the Braves couldn't have given up somebody slightly better for Ross Stripling? Because he would have definitely improved the Braves rotation. I mean, the White Sox are kind of in the same boat. I mean, maybe to a lesser extent because the White Sox do have a somewhat decent rotation right now with a couple of good pitchers in there, but like um and I think you talk about the Padres being the winner, and I think that the Padres did well. They got a couple of big names. Um, I'm gonna wait and see on Clevenger because just for some reason my gut tells me he's not gonna be the same Clevenger anywhere else that he was in Cleveland. Um, and then, but I'll tell you, I think the A's did really well getting Mike Minor, a buy low on Mike Minor, who's still got the stuff that he had last year. Plus, bringing in Tommy La Stella for a guy who may or may not ever, make it as a big leaguer, maybe a reclamation type project. So, I thought the A's did well.
Yeah.
I thought the Mariners did pretty well. I loved the Padres deal for Austin Nola. I didn't love the Clevenger deal. I liked it. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was neat for the Padres. I didn't love it for Clevenger, um, but the Austin Nola deal, I think is going to end up being the one that really puts them in that discussion because I think that was a really good trade. A guy who is a good hitting catcher, um, plus a couple of really good bullpen arms. So I find it confusing in some ways that a team like like the Rangers didn't fully sell. Like why not sell Lance Lynn? You're talking about a team like the you talk about a team like and the other one that I thought did pretty well was the Reds. The Reds aren't as out of it as people think they are, and Brian Goodwin for getting Brian Goodwin for pretty much nothing. Um, I thought that was a really good trade. So um, as well as who was they got someone else too. I'm kind of
Archie
drawing a blank.
Bradley.
Archie Bradley, that's a good bullpen arm who's maybe a little bit of a reclamation, but he's pretty good this year. So
Yeah.
um, he's got
But
a pretty good
that's
hit past, but
yeah. So it was a really active deadline.
for sure.
Um, like we said, we had 25 trades. We weren't sure we would even have more than five with how it was, but it actually seemed to be more of a pretty standard deadline than we thought. A couple head scratching moves, but man, we have gone really long on this episode.
Yes, we have.
Um, so thank you everybody for tuning into this one. Even though it's a couple days late, I'm gonna try and get it up tonight. I got a couple things to do. If not, um, it'll be up Wednesday. By the time you guys are hearing this, it'll already be up, so it doesn't matter. But thank you guys for tuning into this one, um, and we will see you guys next week.
Yeah, have a good week, everybody.